I spent my whole life thinking poetry is the answer, only to get to this stage and realize that it's not. It's the question. That's what all good writing is. It's the damned question.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Art Persists podcast, a series by Bosler Arts offering a glimpse into the life of artists and activists from all over the world, here to share their stories with you, the listener. My name's Georgia, and in this episode we speak to Joelle Taylor. Joelle is an award-winning poet, playwright, author and editor. Her poetry collection Canto and Other Poems won the 2021 T.S. Eliot Prize, and her debut novel The Night Alphabet was released earlier this year. I absolutely loved speaking to Joelle, and in this episode we talk about her upbringing growing up in Lancashire. We talk about how she found poetry and the love of writing through live events, and mostly we unpack her incredible novel The Night Alphabet. The Night Alphabet is set across geographies and time spans. It's a bold and original work, a deep investigation into human nature and violence against women. If you haven't read it already, I strongly advise that you do, and above all, I hope you enjoy listening and hearing from Joelle Taylor.
The Night Alphabet, Chapter 1. I know where I am. Back. This is the last time, it has to be. I land in myself, running across a trim playing field flanked by holographic London plane trees and analogue tower blocks. The grass beneath my feet is well behaved. Here again. Hackney Municipal Park. The weather programmers have calculated this day to always be the start of spring here. The children in the overlooking tower blocks might not be able to afford the daily entrance fee to the playground, but they still catch the artificial breezes from it for free, gathered in blue plastic bags. I have grown to love them. At the exit, a soft tide of tattoos materializes across each of my arms. Without looking, I know the tattoos have begun to find themselves again across my body as though cold. The anchor, the fly and the cat, the great net across my belly, the sound wave, the mermaid, the word mother in a banner, the map of me. Perhaps I look like a gallery rather than a tattooed woman, perhaps. I am a hanged woman, something to be curious about on Sunday afternoons. Maybe each of the tattoos is a still in the film reel of my existence, my skin a cinema screen. Spring is over as soon as I hit the concrete conveyor belt that leads along Mare Street, and a carefully programmed autumn begins. Above me, clouds gather like teenagers considering the ground. Hackney is always the same. The only thing money cannot buy is poverty. It's difficult to gentrify grief, it seems. The Harrods outlets and the abandoned job centres are always going to be a hard sell, and you can sell anything except nothing, though they try that too. While Hackney inherited some of the new technology that the 23rd century brought, it did not stick. There are a few over-friendly holographs of West End shows that leap across the conveyor belt. There are a handful of grimy auto bars, dirt smeared across pink neon, punters smeared across forecourts. Hackney will always find a way to be Hackney. The sky tube snakes back to the shrug of the city, casting its serpentine shadow over me, while my tattoos quietly assemble. I'm headed toward the winter streets, the part of town where the stitches are weakest, where the analogue returns like a lost uncle, tanned, impatient and strange. A couple of passers-by notice me, but they're remembering something that hasn't happened yet. My clothing changes as fast as the weather. I scroll through decades of wardrobe as I run, now a barefooted young woman, now a boot-encased old thing, now a pert man, mouth as tight as deadlines, now the old woman again, whose skin flicks through an exhibition of tattoos, appearing and disappearing, emerging on skin that becomes old as you watch it. I know I smell. I must. It's been a very long 4 minutes, longer than I hope to experience again.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, and welcome, Joelle Taylor, to the Art Persists podcast. How did it feel reading that out? You just mentioned that it's the second time I think you've read aloud.
Yeah, and I've never read that. I've never read the beginning of the book before. I
Wow.
never read it. So, I mean, actually, I tell a complete lie. There is an audio book, and I read that whole thing.
Yeah.
I was like 23 when I started reading it, and it aged me, man. So it's really interesting to sort of hear your words come back at you, because I think we're just constant writers, aren't we?
Yeah.
Even as you're reading it, I was struggling hard not to live edit. I stopped a page and a half before I thought I was going to, because I suddenly became aware of how much time the voice takes, you know.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. And we're going to talk a lot about this book, The Night Alphabet, very shortly. And actually, as you were reading, I remembered that line, money can buy anything except poverty, which is so powerful. So thank you so much for reading it today. Before we get into talking about the book, could you maybe start by introducing yourself, telling us a bit about who you are, where you grew up, a bit about your early life?
Oh, here we go. So I'm 56 years old. I'm from Lancashire in the northwest of England. And I grew up in the sort of 70s. So I grew up around punk and this kind of working class, white, primarily revolution, which worked to educate really the working classes. It's not quite what it appeared in the newspapers. Yes, we look stupid. Yes, we shaved our hair off, but it was more than that. It was about women owning their own bodies again. So
Yeah.
through punk, I learned feminism, I learned queer theory, I learned how to be a dyke. And most importantly, I learned how to do it myself, how to, as an artist with no connection to the arts at all in my family. And in my local area, there was no access to the arts. And so even when I started, I tried to join a writing group in Manchester, aged something like 15, but that was 30 miles away, and I'd have to hitch there and then hitch back.
Wow.
Through a kind of it's all such a terrible story. Through a Lancashire winter,
Yeah.
in bare plimps all through the snow. So really, my background is about trying to translate grief and trying to translate belonging and community into words. And so for the last 30 odd years, I've been a poet primarily. I've also written plays. And yeah, so the live arena has been a really important aspect of my practice,
Yeah.
because you can touch the face of the readers. Not that you should, it's a little bit creepy. But, you know, as a metaphor, it just means that the bridge between people is much shorter. And you can literally reach out and you can have conversations about the work as you're writing it. So this is who I am. I believe that poetry has purpose. All art is activism at its very basics. Because, you know, Roger Robinson, for example, was a poet, another T.S. Eliot winning poet, who described poems as small empathy machines. And I think it's such a beautiful and brilliant description of what we all try to do as writers, is create these little worlds in which we can fall into and be other people and recognize ourselves and recognize our empathetic connection through it all. That's who I am, essentially. How I
Amazing.
write.
And so I'm really excited to talk about the novel, because already I see that so many themes that are so important within the novel are obviously ones that you have gone through personally and talked about and written about as well. When you were kind of first getting into writing and poetry, who were your kind of inspirations as a young person?
So in my sort of teens, it was like I said, it was punk rock. Lyrics were very central to punk rock. So my very first poems were these awful, it's just me shouting at people till they cried, really. But some would argue that's exactly what I've done my entire career. But, you know, so I learned writing through that, not the traditional means, because while there were books in my house, they were all sci-fi and horror books that my parents read. But I'm really grateful they had some books in the house, you know what I mean? So in terms of other writers, what happened was I was listening to the John Peel show. It used to be a radio show at 10 p.m. on a weeknight, and all the sort of new music would be released by John Peel, who's kind of a legend in our community. And he played a record called Sonny's Letter by Linton Kwesi Johnson. And if I advise you now to just, it's on YouTube, go and listen to it. And that's what changed my life as a child, just listening to how somebody could just stand up and tell a little story that lasts 3 minutes. And it'd be so much more powerful than an entire album of music or stuff.
Yeah.
And then through that, Benjamin Zephaniah, I was very privileged to meet and become friends with.
Oh,
Yeah, so absolutely tore the heart out of the poetry community and
Yes.
wider communities. Yeah, so that was it. And then through punk, finding out about Adrian Rich and Wilfred Owen, very different writers. One's a lesbian feminist from the 70s, and the other is, I guess, a gay man from the First World War. But because of that, they kind of, all poems, all books are breadcrumbs. So you'll be reading something you know yourself through your reading taste, and you'll suddenly go, oh, well, I need to go here next. I need to find out who they're talking about. And poets are renowned for referencing each other, you know, in their works anyway. So that's really how I got into it. And really, like I said earlier, focusing on the live scene, which didn't really exist. You could get support slots supporting punk bands, which is what I did.
Wow. Amazing.
And gradually, more and more people got into it, and we created what's thought of as the spoken word scene.
Yeah. That's incredible. And I guess, maybe you can speak a little bit about that, those kind of early days where there weren't really spaces. And I think also when people think about poetry, I think it is changing now, but it's such a privileged space. You know, you need a lot. You need a lot of money, I guess, and support, and also networks. I mean,
well, it's really great. So basically, no, you don't. Poetry has been hijacked and ambushed by an white elite. First thing we did with poetry is say it has to be written. And of course, ancient poetry, it's an oral tradition. And the reason we all relate to it, okay, here's something political for you. There's a very good reason that we've made it elite. It's because it's very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous to have a bunch of people agreeing with each other. It's very dangerous for you, Georgia, to be able to tell your story to a complete stranger in such a way that they feel they're part of it.
Yeah.
Because it ignites a sense of purpose, a self-actualization. There's a reason why in all revolutions they kill the teachers and the poets and the writers first.
Yes.
The artists, because you get rid of that seditious questioning and thinking and curiosity, and then everything else is much, much easier. So first of all, they did that. The spoken word movement was us taking it back. It's that simple. And there are other factors to consider. So you can't talk about poetry without talking about class or talking about race. That's the very first thing we need to discuss. But because of those differences, and because of lack of access, like I said earlier, to reading and to arts, the spoken word scene and the written poetry scene are very different art forms. Like poetry is like water; it has to become the shape of the vessel that holds it. So what we found was the shape of the poetry that fits the live venue doesn't fit the book. Not in the same way, it spills over. It doesn't make sense. Equally, if you take something just written, and I know this because I've physically done it, you take something that's just written for a book, something that's written to be read in an intimate kind of space, into a bigger environment. You change it because you start performing it, and the performance of it starts to change the work itself. Or you choose to read in a monotone, in which case, why are you on stage? So these are the questions we kind of need to discuss and ask about this kind of work.
Yeah.
But what's happened in recent years has been thrilling. So since about 2013, 2014, last decade, Burning Eye Books founded, and that was a revolution in publishing, really, because it took this new print-on-demand format that had come through, which meant they could take risks on unknown people.
Yeah.
And Burning Eye, Clive Burney, the editor, did a really clever thing. He was like, these artists are selling out events, and they don't have any books, but they're selling 300 seaters every night easily. People like Holly McNeish, etc., easily doing that. Let's give them a book contract and they'll just sell out every night. And it's exactly what happened. But because of that, every one of us who was published by Burning Eye fell in love with the page as well. And so you started to get this other bridge develop between what is written and what is spoken. And that's the sweet spot as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. It's where we meet each other, where the page poets are teaching us how to write and we're teaching them how to embody the work, so the two things can come together and create this new poetic, this new aesthetic. That's the theory.
Hi, this is Hussam Fazullah, co-founder of Bosla Arts. The Art Persists podcast is independently run by Bosla Arts, me and Georgia, which allows us to share these important conversations with artists and activists from all over the world. In order to keep having these conversations, we need your help. Join us on Patreon for as little as £3 and help us continue this vital work. More info in the episode description. Now back to the podcast.
I thought maybe you could introduce us to the kind of genre of the Night Alphabet, because you describe it as feminist queer futurism.
Yes.
And actually, as you were saying that about your parents' books always being sci-fi in the house, I thought maybe there might have been some inspiration from that as well. So could you tell us a bit about the genre?
So I'm thinking about it in terms of a new kind of magic realism, I suppose. It's a little bit like that. Why I like speculative fiction is just the word itself. So I think, and in fact, I mentor other writers, and I've just set this woman this task, she was very surprised at this task. I was like, you're going to write an English ghost story. Okay? Because that is the beginnings, as far as I'm concerned, of perfect storytelling. I think of my mother, I think of my grandparents, but particularly the women in my family in Lancashire on a kind of dark, stormy night. And believe me, it was like every night was dark and stormy. Telling a really simple story in an absolutely terrifying way.
Yeah.
With absolute belief, and seeing them make it up as we're going along. I mean, as a child, I absolutely believed it. So for me, queer, feminist, queer futurism is a kind of adaptation of all that. So the queer futurism bit is about atemporality of the body, about fluidity of the body, and it's about time. And I mean, so the original idea, because this is going to sound so trippy to everyone, the original idea comes from a scientific fact that all women are inside their grandmother's ovaries.
Yes.
And as a writer, I just took that. I don't care if it's true. I'm genuinely not interested. But just that very notion. And then I started to look at the female body. I was working with an illustrator, Emily Witham, on the stories, and she drew the kind of female reproductive organs. As I looked at it, I was like, it's a lemniscate. It's the sign for infinity, this whole area.
Yes.
If you look at it, I was like, oh! And so suddenly the ideas, these quite feminist and quite queer political ideas started to take form, you know. And I'm a feminist. Yeah. I genuinely believe women and men are as good as each other. I genuinely believe women globally are radically oppressed in the most disgusting ways. And just because you and I can go out and have a latte by ourselves, you know, doesn't undermine the need for the fight for female equality or women's equality globally, women's inclusive equality. You know, it's about that. And I also, because I am a woman, I genuinely am one. So I want to write about that.
Yeah.
And try to understand it a bit. And, you know, I've had quite a bit of, guess what the young folk would call dysphoria. And I want to understand this body and the part it's played in the things that have happened. And to celebrate all these things happening at the same time. To celebrate the idea of this storytelling that are at the heart of it.
I think what I found so striking in the book is that there are these kind of two constant parallels, because you deal with very, very heavy themes, and so you have the kind of oppression, the as you just said, the universal oppression of women. There's a quote that really, really stayed with me. It's, different countries grow different tongues, but all men speak the same language. And then my head cannot understand them, my body understands them perfectly. And that, you know, in the book, each story, it jumps time, it jumps places, it goes beyond borders. And yet we can really, as we read it, recognize the impact of patriarchy and of oppression of men on women. And it's something, and then at the same time, you have this very warm and hopeful thread throughout, which is the impact of women's solidarity, of resistance, of community, of working together. And so and I just think it's done really, really well, because I feel like sometimes at the moment the world is very catastrophic at the moment. And it's easy to say what's wrong, but it's much harder have hope and to say something, to give strength as well. So maybe you can talk a bit about that parallel and generally how you do that in your work.
I mean, so the insistence to write a book comes from that insistence to look at these injustices. Have been horrific, have affected me very personally. But then once you start to grow and look around the world, you realise that you've had it really great, actually. But wanting to kind of reimagine it, wanted to kind of change people's minds. So the first thing is that in the insistence to fight injustice in some way, to correct the story, or to add voices that are different. But throughout my whole life, no matter what's been going on, and some horrific things that I've found very difficult to deal with, there has been this thread of women's solidarity that runs through it. So really big things like when I was at Greenham Common, just that. And there's a class thing as well, because it's the first time I really met middle-class women at Greenham Common. It was just like being told off all the time. And I found the scummy ones, the scummy women, and hung with them and had a fantastic time and learned a huge amount about solidarity. And so Gutter Girls it's inspired by the fact that I was a lady's maid when I first came to London. And what a lady's maid is somebody who deals with the sex worker punters, essentially, and deals some drugs from the front or whatever. But I wasn't there very long, just enough to kind of get a sense of what the places were like. And by the way, I wasn't doing it for research, it's just genuinely I was working there. So the solidarity that came across, that all these stories, the Gutter Girls story of sex workers rebellion is the same as the Greenham Common women, is the same as the Gulabi girls in India. All these stories where women just suddenly go, you fucking what? What? So, I wanted to really try and put that at the heart of everything.
Yeah.
And very slowly, this thread emerged of Jones and her mum and grandmother, and that this has always been happening to them, these strange experiences. And it became almost like a comic kind of thread throughout it, because Jones is so matter of fact, just really, really northern. She's basically me at 14 years old, just not really understand what the hell is going on. So really, I mean, I'm writing a follow-up to The Night Alphabet now, which is the mother's story.
Oh, wow.
So it'll be similar in terms of multiple stories and tattoos, but it's her story. And then finally, the final book in the stories is how it all began, which is the grandmother. And throughout it all, I want to learn from each book. And I feel like this next book has got to look a bit more at the solidarity and this furious kind of joy that women can share, because you can so quickly become very depressed when you do any research.
Yeah.
Like the one that depressed me, the story that really upset me to write and took a long time was Pipefish, which I started writing in about 2018 when I'd been introduced to this idea of the incel and was sent some links.
Yeah.
And including deadeyes.com, which is a real website.
Oh my God.
So these are real things, and even the quotes I took, obviously I changed it, but it's how they are. And I wanted to get inside I wanted us to feel love for the incel, because it's so easy.
Yeah.
They're so disgusting. They're so and I'm like, where did you come from? No matter how hard I dug to try and find something I loved about Amiga, this guy, all I managed to conjure was the fact that he was afraid of his own masculinity and possible latent homosexuality. I don't know why I threw that in.
I think it's so just for the listener, the chapter is a story following from the kind of the inside of this incel character, and it is deeply, deeply disturbing.
Thank you.
And the fact that it's true is crazy. But I think I think what you just touched upon there is really important, this idea of empathy and understanding. There's another quote from your book that I will read you, which is that the truth is you must be everyone in a story to understand the story. The victim becomes the perpetrator, the liar is lied to. How else are we to learn except through vicious unlearning? And I think it's really poignant, and this idea of when we, it's the most simple thing, but when we try to understand things from everyone's perspective and also find the humanity in the people that that are really not decent people,
Yeah.
it helps us to understand the issues actually.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a bit about, the power of storytelling, and maybe reflect if do you feel like that sense of understanding things from all perspectives is being lost today in society?
Yeah, I think that the way that with the technological advances we have regressed somewhat in our ability to communicate. We have this incredible tool, the internet, which we're on right now, and it allows us to learn thousands of perspectives, but at the same time it celebrates hyper individuality. So it celebrates separation, hyper individualism, the fact that you can buy things, you can change the way you look. Like if I spent a bit of money, I could look fabulous now on this filtered screen, etc. It's really allowed that to take precedence over everything else. And I think where revolution is, where radical thinking is in coming together again. And I can see it a lot in the younger generation of LGBTQ plus, younger generation of queers who I see around and about on the scene, this kind of push toward reforming spaces and coming back together in a physical space. And I think it's absolutely essential because I'm very left-wing, but I don't approve of the Khmer Rouge. And I don't approve of the Khmer Rouge because they killed everybody who thought differently to them.
Yeah.
Meaning that they were just murderers. There was nothing, there was no change. Welcome the new boss, same as the old boss, just wearing a different coloured shirt today. So I think where we have this radical change, and it's also I've been reading a lot about the collectives in the 70s and 80s that I grew up in. These feminist collectives like Silver Moon Bookshop. If you get a chance to speak to Jane Chumley, you should do it. The story is wild. It's incredible. It's so inspiring. And so we have these collectives and they worked so hard to understand everyone's perspective, which was probably the death of them because really at the end you're like, okay, is anyone going to take the lead? But the purpose of art is to create these networks, these bridges between people, and for us to be able to walk across them and spend some time there and go into really unpleasant spaces as well. Not just always walking into escapism, into the fantasy world. But supposing you could take elements of that fantasy world, magic realism or speculative fiction, so you can go into a nasty space but reinvent it a little bit. Ask some questions. What would happen if? Because all writers are they're like your tsunami warning, So if you're following what underground writers are thinking about and approaching, and the poets, they're setting off shots right now, things that are incoming. So let them ask the questions, and I spent my whole life thinking poetry is the answer, only to get to this stage and realize that it's not. It's the question. That's what all good writing is. It's the damned question. Because obviously I'm going to think an insult's a very bad human being, but I want to know why. Was there something we could have said? Is there something? Are you born bad? So there's biological essentialism between men and women. What is that? And obviously I'm going to explore those questions more as we go through the books. But I don't believe in absolute good and absolute evil. I believe
absolutely.
I believe in flawed humanity.
Of course.
But why are the psychos always given the power?
That's the question. That is the question. And I know you work so much with young people, and I was wondering if you've spoken to any young people, particularly within the LGBTQ plus communities, who have read your book and how they have found it and reacted to it.
I mean, we launched it on February 16th and they gave me Queen Elizabeth Hall.
Amazing.
Which is a 900-seater in the South Bank Centre. Obviously, I was like, yes. And then the week preceding, I was like, what are we doing? Literally, what are we doing? There's going to be 3 people in a boiled suite. Can we get the photographer right in the front row? It looks like it's full. And then on the actual night itself, there was about 750. We basically sold out.
It's incredible.
And I would say the vast majority of people in that room were LGBTQ. And they gave a massive standing ovation, like 5 minutes. There was so much. I feel like Kanto did a really amazing thing for me in this last collection I wrote, because it reconnected me to my community. And it's such a generous and loving community, you know, and the fact that I'm writing about things that, you know, I'm very specific. This is about women, or this is about this. It's about what it means to be this.
Yeah.
I think shows the lie that we're all at war, because there's every flavour of us in that room. We're all connecting on stories of oppression and resistance, because that's our commonality.
Yeah.
You know, and the other commonality is we all really enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
And that's something that came out for me that night as well. The book queue lasted 2 hours.
Wow.
I'm really excited to meet more community and talk more about it, and to make more spaces, you know.
Yeah.
For different writers, I'm going to Bristol, Lyra Fest. I'm doing a workshop, masterclass on queer futurism. Really, it's about how we tell our stories in a atemporal, ageographical way.
Yeah.
It's how we take a truth and reimagine it. So I'll find out more as we go along. But to be honest, I'm thrilled at the community. I really am. They've been so supportive.
It's amazing to hear that, and it reminds me of this this really like devastating chapter in the book. I can't remember what the chapter is called, but it's the one where women start slowly disappearing. They start to lose their future.
The woman who wasn't there.
Yeah, the woman who wasn't there. And just hearing you talk and hearing like about kind of reconnecting with your community, but also it's just about being together. And when you're together, you don't disappear. You have this kind of strength and solidarity. So it must be amazing.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you raised that story. So The Woman Who Wasn't There, for listeners' purposes, is a story where all the women in the world start slowly disappearing. A bit of earlobe, you know, an elbow, until finally, like, whole women disappear. And then what starts to happen is women start disappearing from books as well, and then from artworks. So there's literally no trace. And all the guys go crazy, and they're all trying to find out, all start killing each other, obviously, trying to find out what is going on. And our protagonist just slowly, in the middle of talking, disappears. So Night Alphabet 2, we're going to find out where they went.
Oh my God. That is so exciting. Okay.
And there's so many ideas.
Yeah.
I started writing it earlier this year, or late last year. And I want it to be something magnificent. But it's got to ask questions. It can't be. So this is the problem with writing, particularly if you're a left-wing writer. There's good and evil. And I don't want it to be like that. I want to ask some really fundamental human questions.
Yeah.
You know, yes, about males and females, but it's so easy just to, you know, write men off and be very hypercritical.
Yeah.
And be like, women are fabulous. But what about if we throw a spanner in the works? How about Margaret Thatcher? Let's have a look at her, shall we?
Yeah.
Who's that not?
Yeah, it's true.
And what does it mean? So I think it's important at this time to look at biological essentialism, not as something I support 100% at all, but as one of the many questions we as queers need to be asking about the world and our bodies and what space they take up in it. You know? Yeah, but that means also being very critical. I think I do want to write some rip-roaring, like Gutter Girls for me was a rip-roaring story. I just decided that I was going to write a really fucked up Merchant Ivory film about these kind of have-a-go sex workers. Based on the Gulabi Girls. So the Gulabi Girls are like women in India who are facing up to the rising tide of rape and sexual harassment of women. And a lot of them are older women, and they chase a man, say a man's accused of a sexual assault, and they just chase him around town or the village with sticks, and they hit him on the head with sticks. So the Gutter Girls have USB sticks, so it's slightly different. Same idea, they pummel these guys to death with USB sticks.
I love the Gutter Girls chapter, and it's also about like just taking things into your own hands and saying enough. It's a really fantastic chapter. And also just kind of just fun. It's just great.
And we never get to really, really look at women's relationships. Because when we do, we're looking at, say, a very, very white heterosexual idea.
Yeah.
Or we're looking at like the gay kind of thing, like Golden Girls. But what about just those dirty, scruffy, toothless bad girls with terrible senses of humour, slight drug habits? What What about, the fact that we take our babies into work with us?
Yeah.
What happens in these beautifully flawed human beings that, we were talking about earlier? Another example is when I got really ill and went in hospital.
Oh.
This was like ages ago, 2012. And the only positive thing was that I woke up on this hospital ward and it was all women of different ages and different classes. And you just lay there listening to people behind the curtains talking.
Yeah.
Women. We all got each other through. We all started talking to each other and we looked out for each other, and there's a real sense of community. And I really thought we were all going to be best mates forever. And then none of us ever followed up. We have these intense moments of camaraderie, solidarity,
Yeah.
women do tend to look out for each other in that way, and I'm not sure that men do. I'm not sure if they're kind of nurtured into that, looking out for each other.
There's that thing, isn't it, about like the joke of when a woman goes into the toilet in like a club and you just suddenly have like loads of friends and people helping you. But yeah, I don't know if men do. I think it's also that, going back to the main point of like, every woman, obviously to very different degrees, has probably, I think pretty much every woman will have experienced the oppression of men in some shape or form. And it is something that humbles us from an early age, actually.
Yeah.
And I think and probably that's why also women are generally more empathetic, because we understand, we can connect in some way.
Yeah, and maybe there's something about behavior of herds as prey.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you and I, it doesn't matter how much you work out, if you and I are, or it doesn't matter what clothes I wear, that I look a lot more masculine. We're both getting battered if a guy comes for us, because we are physically just not of the same body, not of the same strength. So we have to watch out for each other. And you have the older ones stand. This is a theory in Maryville as well. You have the old butchers and old femmes standing on the outside, and all the young kids in the middle, growing up, playing, partying, doing drugs. But we are a herd in a sense. You need someone always watching. Which makes it sound like I think all men are just like evil predators. And I want to assure everyone that all my best friends and working relationships are male. The whole of Outspoken is a boys' club. Everything I do, my closest friends. So it's not that, but I'm very critical of patriarchy or a patriarchal system, because I see it.
Yeah.
See what happens to girls all the time. And even mentoring, Georgia, I can guarantee if a young woman wants to talk to me about her writing, she'll first of all apologise for having written. Very first thing.
Yeah.
No man will. So you've got that strange thing, oh, God, give me the confidence of a mediocre white man.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a perfect prayer.
and confidence goes such a long way. I mean, if you have confidence, you are one step ahead already.
Which is where class, gender, sex and race come into it all. Because if you're constantly apologising, I think this is one of the oldest stories. It's got to be the difference between man and woman.
Yeah. I've taken a lot of your time, so I think I just have one last question reflecting on the Night Alphabet, which is, I mean, I think I already know the answers, but through reading one of the chapters, The Quiet Men, but I wanted to just reflect on the year ahead. Obviously, we have in the UK a general election coming up, which could and probably will end, I think it's 14 years of Tory rule. As it stands, as a writer, an author, a mentor, everything, how do you see the state of the arts and culture in the UK at the moment?
I do a lot of travelling and a lot of international work, and I'm sorry to say the state of the UK is appalling, and everyone who visits says the same. These last 14 years have ripped apart the arts. It's ripped apart the heart of London, because we had Boris Johnson as mayor for a long time, so a lot of things being sold, and so the infrastructure has gone, the artistic infrastructure. The cost of living is ridiculous, so it's impossible for kids, unless they're coming from independent wealth, to become artists. We were able to squat. But I will say that prior to this period in time, in 1997, when I was probably about your age, Tony Blair was elected in, and that was after something like 18 years of Thatcherism. which ripped the heart out of the communities and, of the UK. And it was incredible, the change that happened overnight. Everyone was on the streets, everybody was partying in the middle of the day, the sense of relief, the investment in the arts, absolutely, quadrupled. All community groups got funded, youth centres set up. We started to actually think about quality of life, not how much money you could squeeze out of each individual shattered, knackered person. And, so I think it's appalling. I think vote with your heart, just fight. Fight, make the world better because you can. You just need to get rid of these people.
We'd like to thank Joelle Taylor for joining us for this week's episode. As always, if you'd like to find out more about her work or get your copy of The Night Alphabet, you can find links in the episode description. And thank you for joining us for another episode of the Art Persists podcast. As always, if you are enjoying it, we just ask you to follow us wherever you listen, give us a rating, and also share with friends and family. Only with your help can these really important stories be heard. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week with the next episode.